Hey there, Internet. Welcome to another episode of the John Graves Show, and I wanted to talk to everybody about the 1080p 60 frames per second gaming thing. In my personal experience, honestly, our set thing, or at least our set frames per second when it comes to 60 frames per second nowadays, or better yet, we kind of were always lax about the 60 frames per second thing, even back when 60 frames per second were kind of a big thing for the late PlayStation 2 life cycle. Even some of the games in PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, even in those life cycles, not every game was 60 frames per second, and really we kind of didn't pay all that much attention to it. It's even the same thing when it comes down to, like, it even kind of turns into a thing when it's like you play like an old PlayStation 2 game, and then the old PlayStation 2 game is like 480p, and really you don't really mind it because, I've played Resident Evil 4 like plenty of times, and honestly, if I play it today, even though that game runs around about like 50 frames per second, it's still something in which that I can just play it and have fun with because, it still feels like a video game. Or at least, like, it still kind of, runs well, and, we're not having choppy, laggy, messes and all that. However, for, like, the 60 frames per second thing, it may only be because it's 2004, but honestly, it's turned into a thing of that, like, people honestly look at the 1080p thing, and they look at the 60 frames per second thing. The 60 frames per second thing. And they put it in a perspective which, honestly, in so many words, it doesn't really make all that much sense. In terms of, it's 2014. Every game should be 1080p and 60 frames per second. Honestly, it shouldn't, because if every game was 60 frames per second, you see, now, that is kind of like saying, like, yeah, man, every first-person shooter game should have pretty much Call of Duty graphics and Call of Duty gameplay. If it did, then what would the point of really making any other game other than making any other first-person shooter different than Call of Duty? Like, if somebody tried to remake the classic Doom, and, I'm not adding mods, but honestly, if they just remade Doom and then kind of just took everything which was Call of Duty and just put it in there, kind of wouldn't be all that iconic, would it? It would just feel like a higher graphics, a Doom with higher graphics and a bit more of cheaper gunplay. So there would be that. However, it's like a thing of, like, when it comes right down to it, it turns into a thing of, like, man, you are focusing so much on this now. It's turning into, I say this a lot more in most of my videos, but like, it's back when, like, Xbox Live, when it first took off, and pretty much every game, it needed to have online multiplayer, or else it would get scored down for it. Or better yet, a few years after that, if it didn't have, like, realistic graphics or, like, realistic whatever in it, it would get marked down because it wasn't realistic enough. Honestly, for this generation, it's odd to me in which that after graphics had pretty much kind of had reached their peak, it slowly turned into 60 frames per second in 1080p. Which is something to me because 1080p is slowly starting to go away, and we're about to start making way for, like, 4K, which is actually something which is even above that. So I'm like, I get it. You want this to be the bare minimum. However, every game should not have that because certain games, they don't need it. Like, remaking The Last of Us with 60 frames per second graphics doesn't need it. The game is already out, and it's practically, and a lot of people have already played it. Honestly, if you really wanted to, you could just port the game over onto the PlayStation 4 and just sell the game for like $15. It's pretty much you're just upping the graphics and just upping the frame rate, which is something because I could see if it actually affected the game in terms of, like, it changed something in the story. It changed how pretty much how a character acted or something like that. Okay, fine. It's a different story element. It changes the way how pretty much I can play and enjoy the game or pretty much experience it. And it's not doing any of that. It's honestly the same thing when it's like, yeah, man, you know, we kind of have a Disgaea game. And it turned into a whole thing of like, yeah, man, the argument is that Disgaea is a bad game because it uses 2D sprites instead of 3D sprites. Every game does need to have 3D graphics. Every game doesn't need 60 frames per second. Every game doesn't need 1080p graphics. I mean, honestly, if you want it to run nice, okay, fine. Have the game, man, running nicely, lock it, and it's perfectly fine. It was a conversation in which that I kind of recently heard, which was like that Resident Evil 4 is a good game because honestly it runs at a steady frame rate. However, I do believe that like somewhere in like however, it was one of the other ones which did have screen tearing, and it did actually kind of destroy the game for a few people. And I'm like, look, I can understand that screen tearing is a problem. I've kind of experienced it a few times, but it's not something in which that really kind of breaks the game for me. Because I know that a lot of reviews, they do kind of look at a few games and say, yeah, screen tearing, whatever. But at the end of the day, though, I'm like, yeah, most of that comes from, but I can see how that is a problem and that needs to be fixed. However, for games that do run fine, games like Tomb Raider, games like Last of Us, Walking Dead, I could see them remaking that because honestly, that game, it did have a few graphical errors in it, which did need. It did have a lot of technical issues in it in which that they needed to patch and remake and kind of fix. See, I can understand that. However, for games that are already working well, games that kind of already have everything working out well for them, I don't really see the point of them actually just taking the game and then upping the graphics on it. It's kind of like how like I look at a game which has HD remix to it, and I'm like, I don't really get the HD remix because it's not something which is actually helping out the game, really. It's just making it look better. I mean, if it's, HD remix. You see, I can actually understand an HD remix of, let's say, Twin Snakes because that old gaming style, it doesn't work anymore. See, now the 1080p 60 frames per second thing, see, I can be okay with that if it's for a game style which is being remade and redoctored upon to like another system. If it doesn't work more in the times, because Metal Gear Solid 1, as much as people love it, as much as I like it, Twin Snakes was a better version of it in terms of when Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, and it's like, yeah, man, we need to play Metal Gear Solid 1 again, but yet it does have, but even though it runs smoothly, for me it did kind of jerk down just a little bit at certain points. And honestly, I can actually see them going in and just remaking the game and kind of upping graphics, upping frame rate, upping pretty much how everything in the game works, because I can actually understand that, some cutscenes or whatever. However, again, doing that for Tomb Raider, dumb. Doing that for Resident Evil 1, the director's cut, and making the Resident Evil remake, okay, fine. Okay, fine. I don't have a problem with that because you're actually changing things in the game along with the graphics and the frame rate. So, honestly, that is what I got to say about that. What do you guys think about it? Please tell me down there in the comment section. I'll catch you on the next John Grave show. So please keep watching anime, keep playing video games. I am out.